Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a forest floor, silent, damp, covered in fallen leaves. Now picture something rising from that darkness, something that wasn't there yesterday. A mushroom, soft, quiet, appearing like a whisper in the night. These strange beings live in a world between, not quite plant, not quite animal, but something else entirely. They breathe as we do, taking in oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide into the cool air. And tonight, we're going to drift through their hidden kingdom together, slowly, gently, learning about the most peaceful, fascinating secrets they hold. My name is Alara, and welcome to the Late Night Science Channel. If you find comfort in these quiet journeys through science, a like or subscribe would mean so much. It helps others discover this calm space, one peaceful mind at a time. But no pressure at all. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Mushrooms have been here far longer than we have. They've been shaping this planet for hundreds of millions of years, long before the first forests even existed. Some of them glow softly in the darkness, like tiny lanterns scattered across the forest floor, creating an otherworldly scene that seems almost magical. Others stretch vast and invisible beneath our feet, weaving intricate networks that connect trees, plants, and soil in ways we're only beginning to understand. A few mushrooms dazzle with colors so vivid they seem almost painted by hand: bright reds, deep purples, electric blues. And yes, some carry poisons so potent that a single bite could be fatal. But mushrooms are also healers. They've given us life-saving medicines. They're builders, creating materials stronger than steel. They're recyclers, breaking down everything that dies and returning it to the earth. They make our bread rise. They turn grapes into wine. They can even digest plastic and clean up oil spills. And perhaps most remarkably, they might one day help us survive on other planets. But let's start with something that surprises almost everyone. Mushrooms, despite growing from soil and appearing alongside flowers and ferns, are actually more closely related to us, to animals, than they are to plants. At the genetic level, fungi share a common ancestor with all animals, not with the plant kingdom. This discovery changed how scientists view the tree of life itself. Mushrooms breathe oxygen just like we do, and they exhale carbon dioxide into the cool air. Their cell walls aren't made of cellulose like plants use. Instead, they're constructed from chitin, the exact same tough, flexible material that forms the exoskeletons of insects, the shells of crabs, the protective covering of beetles. This strange kinship places fungi in their own separate family, their own kingdom of life, distinct from everything else. When you walk through a forest and see mushrooms sprouting between roots and moss, it's easy to assume they belong with the trees and grasses. But in truth, on a fundamental biological level, mushrooms are distant cousins to the birds singing overhead, the deer moving through the underbrush, even to you and me. To understand that a mushroom has more in common with a butterfly than with a daisy can shift how you see the natural world forever. It reminds us that appearances can be deceiving, that life organizes itself in unexpected ways, that the boundaries we draw between living things are often blurrier than we think. And speaking of unexpected beauty, some mushrooms create their own light. Imagine walking through a dark forest at night, no moon above, just darkness pressing in from all sides. And then you notice them. Small glowing spots scattered across the ground, soft green or pale blue lights emanating from mushrooms growing on fallen logs and damp soil. This phenomenon is called bioluminescence, the same kind of natural light produced by fireflies dancing on summer evenings and strange creatures drifting through the deep ocean. Scientists have documented more than 70 species of mushrooms that can glow like this, including varieties with wonderful names like foxfire fungi and ghost mushrooms. Why do they glow? The truth is, we're still learning. Some researchers believe the light attracts insects during the night hours, insects that then brush against the mushroom and carry away spores, helping the fungus reproduce by spreading its microscopic seeds far and wide. Others think the glow might serve as a defense mechanism, a warning to creatures that might otherwise eat them, a signal that says, "Stay away, I might be dangerous." The light comes from a chemical reaction involving a substance called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase, the same family of compounds that give fireflies their flickering glow. The reaction is cool, producing light without heat, a gentle radiance that seems almost supernatural. To encounter one of these glowing mushrooms in the wild is to witness something that feels like magic, ancient and pure. Living light emerging from decay, from wood breaking down and returning to soil. It's proof that even in death, even in darkness, beauty can shine through. The forest at night becomes a constellation of tiny stars at ground level, each one a mushroom, quietly glowing, patiently waiting, existing in its own mysterious purpose. But most of what mushrooms do happens where we can't see it at all. Beneath your feet, hidden completely underground, there may be a living network so vast it stretches for miles in all directions. What we call a mushroom, the part that pops up above ground with its cap and stem, is actually just the fruiting body of the mushroom itself, similar to how an apple is just the fruit of an apple tree. The real organism, the main body of the fungus, lives below the surface as something called mycelium. Mycelium consists of incredibly thin, thread-like filaments, each one thinner than a human hair, weaving through soil, wrapping around pebbles and roots, penetrating leaf litter and dead wood, creating an intricate three-dimensional web of life. In some places, this network is unimaginably enormous. A single mycelial organism can extend across entire hillsides and valleys, connecting thousands of trees in an underground alliance. Think of it as an invisible net made of living tissue, silent yet incredibly active, working constantly beneath the forest floor. Through these networks, fungi perform remarkable services. They recycle nutrients from dead material back into forms that plants can use. They transport water from wet areas to dry ones, and they even help plants trade resources with one another. A tree struggling in shade might receive extra sugars from its sunlit neighbors, passed along through fungal threads that act as intermediaries, as translators, as the internet of the forest. Some scientists call this the wood wide web, a term that captures both the scale and the connectivity of these fungal networks. It's as though the earth itself has veins running through it, invisible highways of communication and exchange, all maintained by mushrooms and their fungal threads. To walk across a meadow or through woods is to step, perhaps unknowingly, on one massive creature that might be older than human civilization, patient, quiet, existing in its own mysterious purpose. And in fact, the largest living organism on our entire planet is a mushroom. In the Blue Mountains of eastern Oregon, there's a forest that looks ordinary at first glance: pine trees reaching towards the sky, mountain streams cutting through valleys, meadows dotted with wildflowers. But hidden beneath the soil lies something extraordinary, the largest known living organism on Earth. It's a single fungal network of Armillaria ostii, commonly called the honey fungus. This colossal mycelium spreads across nearly 4 square miles of forest floor, and scientists estimate it could be thousands of years old, possibly between 2,000 and 8,000 years old, though exact dating is difficult. Every honey mushroom that fruits in that forest, popping up from the ground in autumn, is just one small expression of this enormous underground entity. To put its size in perspective, this single organism outweighs the largest blue whale many times over. It has been growing, spreading, living quietly beneath the feet of elk and eagles, beneath the roots of trees, through ice ages and droughts and fires, long before Europeans arrived in North America, long before the pyramids were built. When scientists first discovered its true extent, they were astonished. They had been walking through what they thought was a forest of many organisms, only to realize they were standing on top of one vast being, ancient and alive, thriving in slow motion beneath them. It's humbling, isn't it, to think that something so large, so old, so significant has been living its life completely hidden from human eyes for millennia. The fungus spreads through soil, feeding on tree roots, breaking down dead wood, existing in a timescale that makes human lifespans seem like brief flickers. And it reminds us that the natural world contains wonders we're only beginning to comprehend, that size and age and life itself can manifest in forms we never expected. Mushrooms don't have brains. They don't have nervous systems, no neurons firing, no central command center making decisions. And yet, they communicate. Through their mycelial networks, fungi send information from one part of the organism to another using what appear to be electrical signals, tiny pulses that travel through the threads like messages moving along wires. These signals resemble, in a strange way, the electrical impulses that travel between neurons in animal brains, though obviously on a much simpler scale. Scientists studying these fungal networks have found that the patterns of electrical activity change in response to different conditions. When one part of the network encounters food, the signal patterns shift. When damage occurs, different patterns emerge. The frequency and rhythm of these pulses seem to carry meaning, information encoded in electrical language. Some researchers have even suggested that these patterns look somewhat like words, like a basic vocabulary of signals that fungi might use to coordinate their growth and behavior across vast distances underground. It's as though an internet is woven into the soil, invisible cables of living tissue transmitting data in a language we're only now learning to detect and decode. Through this system, fungi might share warnings about environmental threats, coordinate their response to changing seasons, or direct resources to areas where they're needed most. Trees connected to these networks can send sugars to one another through fungal intermediaries, trading resources in a cooperative economy that exists entirely underground. While we shouldn't imagine mushrooms sitting around having conversations like humans do, there's clearly something happening here, some form of information transfer, some kind of communication that allows these organisms to function as coordinated wholes despite lacking anything resembling a brain. It's a reminder that intelligence, or at least something like it, can take forms completely unlike our own. The earth hums with conversations we cannot hear, signals passing through soil and roots, messages written in electrical pulses traveling through fungal threads that have been here far longer than we have. And mushrooms are tough in ways that seem almost impossible. Some species can survive conditions that would kill nearly every other living thing on Earth, including the vacuum of space itself. When scientists wanted to test what kinds of life could potentially survive beyond our planet, they brought fungal spores along on spacecraft, exposing them to the harsh conditions outside the protective cocoon of Earth's atmosphere. The results were astonishing. Many fungal spores not only survived being exposed to the vacuum of space, but they also endured intense cosmic radiation and temperatures far below freezing, conditions that would instantly kill most organisms. These spores floated outside spacecraft for days, or even weeks, with nothing protecting them except their own natural resilience. When brought back to Earth, many of those spores were still alive, still capable of growing and reproducing as if nothing unusual had happened. This extraordinary toughness makes fungi fascinating subjects for astrobiology, the study of potential life beyond Earth. If fungal spores can survive the void of space, then perhaps life itself could travel between planets, riding on meteorites or dust particles, drifting across the cosmic distances between worlds. This idea is called panspermia, and fungi provide some of the strongest evidence that such journeys might actually be possible. Imagine a spore released from a mushroom growing on a distant planet, somehow launched into space by a volcanic eruption or asteroid impact, then drifting through the darkness for thousands or millions of years, finally landing on another world where it settles into soil and begins to grow again. It sounds like science fiction, but the resilience of fungal spores suggests it might not be impossible at all. The humble mushroom, so often overlooked as we walk past it in the forest, might be one of the most space-worthy forms of life we know, carrying within its microscopic seeds the potential to spread life across galaxies, waiting patiently in the void for a new beginning. And mushrooms have been found in some of the most unexpected, dangerous places on Earth. After the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986, when a reactor exploded and released massive amounts of radiation across the surrounding landscape, scientists studying the ruined facility years later found something shocking. Fungi were thriving inside the reactor itself, growing in some of the most radioactive places on the planet. Certain species, including a black fungus called Cryptococcus neoformans, weren't just surviving the radiation, they seemed to be growing towards it, as if attracted to the very thing that should have killed them. These fungi contain melanin, the same pigment that gives color to human skin and helps us protect from sunburn. But in these radiation-eating mushrooms, melanin appears to serve a completely different function. Instead of simply blocking radiation, it seems to help convert radioactive energy into chemical energy the fungus can use, almost like a bizarre form of photosynthesis where radiation replaces sunlight as the energy source. It's as though these mushrooms have learned to eat danger itself, transforming what we consider deadly into fuel for growth and survival. The implications of this discovery are profound. If we can understand how these fungi process radiation, we might be able to use them to clean up nuclear waste sites, places currently too dangerous for humans to enter. We might even be able to develop technologies that protect astronauts from cosmic radiation during long space journeys, using fungal compounds or living fungal barriers as shields. In the darkest, most contaminated places on Earth, places where human error created disasters that will last for thousands of years, mushrooms have found a way not just to survive, but to thrive. They stand as proof that life is more adaptable, more creative, more resilient than we ever imagined. And mushrooms can help heal the planet in other ways too. Some mushrooms are nature's cleanup crew on a grand scale, capable of breaking down materials that normally persist in the environment for centuries. Plastic, one of humanity's most troublesome inventions, can last for hundreds of years without decomposing, but certain fungi have evolved the ability to digest it. In 2011, researchers found a fungus in the Amazon rainforest that could eat polyurethane, one of the most common and stubborn plastics in use worldwide. The fungus produces enzymes that break down the chemical bonds holding plastic molecules together, essentially digesting petroleum-based materials and converting them into harmless compounds. Other fungi have shown the ability to break down oil, transforming toxic petroleum spills into nutrients that plants can use. Imagine a future where contaminated sites aren't cleaned by huge machines and chemical treatments, but by carefully cultivated fungal colonies that quietly eat through pollution, turning waste into soil. Scientists are actively researching how to scale up these processes, how to use mushrooms as living factories that consume what we carelessly discarded. In a world drowning in plastic waste and industrial contamination, fungi offer hope, proof that nature has already evolved solutions to problems we created, if only we're wise enough to recognize and use them. And mushrooms also remind us that nature doesn't exist purely for our benefit, that beauty and danger often intertwine in unexpected ways. Some species carry toxins so powerful that even a small taste can be fatal to humans. The death cap mushroom, Amanita phalloides, is among the deadliest organisms on Earth. It looks deceptively ordinary, a pale greenish cap atop a white stem, easy to mistake for edible varieties if you don't know what to look for. But hidden in its tissues are amatoxins, chemicals so poisonous that just half a mushroom cap can be enough to kill a healthy adult. The truly frightening thing about death cap poisoning is how it progresses. After eating the mushroom, you might feel fine for hours, sometimes for an entire day. During this time, you might think you're safe, that perhaps you were worried over nothing, but the toxins are working silently, spreading through your bloodstream, targeting your liver and kidneys. By the time symptoms appear, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, the damage is often already severe. There's no antidote, no way to neutralize the poison once it's been absorbed. Medical teams can provide supportive care, sometimes even emergency liver transplants, but survival is far from guaranteed. Throughout history, death cap mushrooms have killed countless people, from ancient Roman emperors to modern foragers who made tragic identification mistakes. The fact that such lethal chemistry can exist in something so fragile, so easily overlooked, reminds us that the natural world operates by its own rules, indifferent to human desires or expectations. Beauty and terror coexist in the forest, sometimes in the same organism, sometimes separated by nothing more than a slight difference in cap color or stem texture. Nature demands respect, careful observation, humility in the face of forces we don't fully control or understand. But not all mushrooms bring danger. Some bring unexpected delight, especially to our taste buds. Certain species have flavors so distinctive, so unusual, that they mimic foods from completely different kingdoms of life. The lobster mushroom, for instance, earns its name honestly. It has a bright reddish-orange color that resembles cooked shellfish, and when you taste it, there's a sweetness, a subtle seafood-like flavor that genuinely recalls lobster or crab. It's remarkable that something growing from soil can taste like something from the ocean, bridging two completely separate ecosystems through chemistry and flavor. Then there's chicken of the woods, a shelf fungus that grows in layered fan-like formations on tree trunks. When cooked, it tears apart in chunks that look and feel remarkably similar to chicken breast, both in texture and taste. People have been using these mushrooms as meat substitutes for centuries, long before modern plant-based diets became popular. To bite into one is to experience the strange versatility of the fungal kingdom, how something rooted to a tree can somehow create compounds that trigger the same taste receptors as animal flesh. These mushrooms are culinary treasures, prized by foragers who know where and when to find them. They represent nature's creativity, how evolution can produce the same flavors through completely different pathways. It's as if mushrooms are shapeshifters of taste, borrowing sensations from distant parts of the tree of life while remaining firmly in their own mysterious category. When you eat one, you're experiencing a form of biochemical mimicry that crosses kingdoms, a reminder that taste itself is just chemistry, molecules binding to receptors, and nature can replicate those molecules in surprising places. For thousands of years, humans have recognized something special, something sacred in certain mushrooms. Ancient cultures around the world incorporated fungi into spiritual practices and ceremonies, seeing in them doorways to altered states of consciousness, bridges between the ordinary world and something beyond. In Siberia, shamans used the distinctive red and white Amanita muscaria, the iconic mushroom that appears in fairy tales and folklore, to enter trance states during rituals. The mushroom contains psychoactive compounds that alter perception, creating visions and experiences that shamans interpreted as communications with the spirit world. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs had a profound relationship with certain mushrooms, calling them Teonanacatl, which translates roughly to flesh of the gods. These sacred fungi were consumed during religious ceremonies designed to connect participants with divine forces, to seek wisdom, to heal spiritual wounds. The practice was so central to their culture that Spanish conquistadors, threatened by religious traditions they didn't understand, tried to suppress it, driving it underground where it persisted in secret for centuries. Even older evidence exists. Cave paintings in Spain, created over 6,000 years ago, show human figures holding what appear to be mushrooms, suggesting that even our prehistoric ancestors recognized something significant in these organisms. Were they using them in rituals, in healing practices, in attempts to understand the mysteries of existence? We can't know for certain, but the images suggest a long, deep relationship between humans and fungi, one that predates written history. To ancient peoples, mushrooms seemed almost magical, appearing overnight as if conjured from nothing, growing from death and decay, sometimes glowing in the dark, sometimes changing consciousness in profound ways. They were neither plant nor animal, but something in between, something that seemed to belong partly to another world. Even today, mushrooms occupy a liminal space in our imagination, sitting at the boundary between the familiar and the strange, the known and the mysterious. They remind us that the earth holds secrets we're still learning to read, wisdom encoded in organisms that have been here far longer than we have. Some mushrooms have evolved strategies for survival that seem almost like science fiction. Take cordyceps, for example, a group of fungi that are simultaneously fascinating and unsettling. These mushrooms don't simply grow in soil or on dead wood, they infect insects, taking control of their very behavior. It begins when a microscopic spore lands on an ant or other insect. The spore germinates, and fungal threads begin growing inside the insect's body, slowly spreading through its tissues. Eventually, the fungus reaches the ant's brain, or at least the structures that control its behavior, and something remarkable and disturbing happens. The infected ant stops acting normally. Instead of following the patterns of its colony, it begins to climb, compelled by chemical signals from the fungus. It ascends a plant stem or tree to exactly the height that benefits the fungus most, a location where temperature and humidity are ideal for spore dispersal, where air currents will carry the spores farthest. There, the ant clamps down with its mandibles, attaching itself permanently to the plant. And then it dies, still holding on, frozen in place. The fungus, having used up its host, then grows a fruiting body, a stalked mushroom that bursts through the ant's exoskeleton and rises into the air like a grotesque flower, releasing spores that drift down onto the forest floor below, where they can infect new victims and continue the cycle. This gruesome process has earned cordyceps the nickname zombie fungus, and while it's deeply unsettling to imagine, it's also a testament to the incredible, almost unbelievable strategies that evolution can produce. The fungus doesn't kill the ant immediately. Instead, it manipulates its behavior with chemical precision, turning the ant into an unwilling participant in the fungus's reproduction. It's a reminder that nature operates without morality, without concern for individual suffering, focused only on survival and reproduction. The forest floor hides entire dramas like this, tiny tragedies and triumphs playing out constantly, invisible to us unless we look very closely. Every fallen log, every patch of moss might harbor these silent stories where mushrooms use other organisms as tools, as vehicles, as unwitting collaborators in their own continuation. But cordyceps isn't the only fungus that has reshaped ecosystems in dramatic ways. In the late 20th century, biologists around the world began noticing something terrible. Frogs, toads, and salamanders were disappearing at alarming rates. Entire populations vanished seemingly overnight, and for years, scientists struggled to understand why. The culprit eventually turned out to be a fungus called Batrachochytrium dendribatides, known for short as BD. This tiny fungus infects the skin of amphibians, and because amphibians breathe partially through their skin and regulate water balance through it, the infection is often fatal. The fungus disrupts these vital processes, and infected animals essentially suffocate or dehydrate despite being surrounded by water and air. BD has been called one of the most devastating pathogens in recorded history. It has driven dozens of amphibian species to extinction and pushed hundreds more to the brink. Whole soundscapes changed as frog calls went silent. Entire ecosystems shifted as amphibians disappeared from streams and forests. To think that something so microscopically small, invisible to the human eye without equipment, could reshape continents' worth of life is both humbling and frightening. It shows the incredible power fungi wield, their ability to influence the world on scales we rarely appreciate. Even now, conservation efforts are racing to save vulnerable species, developing antifungal treatments, creating breeding programs, establishing refuge populations in captivity. The story of BD is sobering. It reminds us that fungi are not only helpers, recyclers, and healers. Sometimes they're also destroyers, agents of change that can alter the course of life on Earth in ways we never anticipated and struggle to control. And yet, even as we talk about the power of fungi to change ecosystems, there's something else remarkable happening that most people never consider. Every single breath you take right now, as you're listening to these words, contains mushroom spores. The air around you, whether you're indoors or outside, in a city or a forest, is filled with billions of microscopic fungal spores floating invisibly, drifting on air currents, settling on surfaces, waiting for the right conditions to grow. Scientists estimate that each cubic meter of outdoor air, the space roughly the size of a large refrigerator, can contain thousands of spores at any given moment. They're everywhere, constantly, an invisible rain of potential life falling through the atmosphere. You inhale them without ever noticing. Your body is adapted to this. Your immune system recognizes these particles and deals with them routinely, filtering them out or destroying them before they can cause problems. In fact, fungal spores are among the most common biological particles in Earth's entire atmosphere, more abundant than pollen during many times of year. They drift through cities, traveling between skyscrapers, riding subway ventilation systems, settling in parks and gardens. They float over oceans, crossing thousands of miles of open water. They rise with warm air currents and fall with raindrops, each drop potentially carrying spores from clouds back down to Earth. In a very real sense, every breath connects you to distant forests and ecosystems you may never visit. When you breathe in a city apartment, some of those spores might have come from trees hundreds of miles away, released days ago and carried on the wind until they reached your window. The air itself becomes a bridge between environments, between organisms, between you and the vast fungal kingdom that exists mostly unseen but always present. You are always, in every moment, breathing in the silent presence of mushrooms, particles of their being mingling with yours in the most intimate way possible, entering your lungs, touching your tissues, connecting you to the hidden web of life that surrounds us all. And these spores are extraordinarily well designed for travel. Unlike seeds, which are often heavy and fall close to the parent plant, fungal spores are incredibly tiny and lightweight, so small that they can remain suspended in air for remarkable lengths of time. Some have been detected more than 20 miles above Earth's surface, floating in the stratosphere, riding high-altitude winds that circle the entire planet. At those heights, they face intense ultraviolet radiation from the sun, extreme cold, and incredibly dry conditions, yet many survive the journey. Spores are equipped with tough protective coats, sometimes containing melanin or other compounds that shield their genetic material from damage, allowing them to survive journeys that would destroy more fragile forms of life. This ability to travel vast distances makes fungi some of the most successful colonizers in the entire natural world. A single spore released from a puffball mushroom in a meadow can rise into the sky, catch a jet stream wind current, and travel across oceans and continents. Months later, it might settle into soil on the other side of the planet, far from where it began, ready to grow if conditions are right. The atmosphere itself becomes a highway for fungal life, an invisible transportation network that has been operating for hundreds of millions of years, long before humans invented roads or ships or airplanes. Spores are patient travelers, capable of waiting, dormant and protected, until they find the right combination of moisture, temperature, and nutrients to begin growing again. Some spores are so tough they can even survive journeys through space itself. In experiments designed to test the limits of life, scientists exposed fungal spores to the vacuum of space, the intense radiation beyond Earth's protective magnetic field, and the extreme temperature swings that occur in orbit. Many spores not only survived, but remained viable, still capable of germinating and growing when returned to normal conditions. They floated outside spacecraft for weeks, exposed to cosmic rays and solar radiation, subjected to temperatures that swing from hundreds of degrees above freezing in sunlight to hundreds of degrees below freezing in shadow, all while experiencing the absolute vacuum where there's no air, no pressure, nothing but empty space, and they lived through it. This extraordinary resilience has sparked fascinating speculation about panspermia, the idea that life might spread between planets or even between star systems, carried on asteroids, comets, or interstellar dust. If fungal spores can survive the void of space, then perhaps life is more portable than we once believed. Perhaps it could travel on chunks of rock blasted off planets by impacts, drifting through space for millions of years, eventually landing on new worlds where it could take root and begin again. When you watch a mushroom release its spores in a gentle cloud of dust, you're witnessing a survival strategy so effective that it might work not just across continents, but across the solar system itself. Those tiny particles are explorers, hardy enough to endure journeys we can barely imagine, waiting for new worlds to call home. While spores travel through air, the mycelium beneath our feet accomplishes something equally remarkable. It breaks down stone. We tend to think of stone as eternal, as the permanent foundation of the world, but even stone yields to the patient persistence of fungi. Some species, particularly lichens, which are partnerships between fungi and algae, secrete acids that can dissolve minerals. These acids work slowly, gradually breaking chemical bonds in rock, liberating nutrients like calcium, magnesium, and potassium, transforming solid stone into soil, particle by particle, molecule by molecule. This process happens over centuries or even millennia, so slowly that we never see it happening, but it's constantly at work. Without fungi and lichens, much of Earth might still be bare rock, unable to support the lush forests and grasslands we know today. Fungi are, in a very real sense, Earth's earliest gardeners, the first organisms to begin preparing the planet for plant life. Even today, you can see this process at work if you know where to look. On old tombstones in cemeteries, you might notice lichens slowly etching patterns into marble or granite. On mountain cliffs, patches of color, orange, green, gray, mark where lichens are gradually breaking down the rock face. Ancient ruins slowly crumble, not just from wind and rain, but from fungal acids working patiently at the stone. With patience measured in centuries rather than days, fungi quietly reshape the solid bones of the world, proving that nothing is truly permanent, that even mountains eventually yield to the slow work of tiny organisms. And fungi create patterns in the landscape that seem almost magical. If you've ever walked through a grassy field after rain, you might have encountered a fairy ring, a perfect circle of mushrooms arranged as if someone drew a compass and planted them precisely along the curve. These rings have inspired folklore for centuries, with people imagining they marked places where fairies danced at night, or doorways to other realms, or warnings about magical creatures. But the explanation, while less mystical, is perhaps even more wonderful. A fairy ring forms as a single fungus grows outward in all directions underground. The mushrooms you see are just the visible edge of this expanding colony, marking where the mycelium has pushed its frontier outward from a central point. Over time, the ring grows larger, sometimes expanding several inches or a foot each year as the mycelium exhausts nutrients at the center and continues spreading outward. The caps unfold, the stems lengthen, and what was invisible becomes visible in what seems like an instant. It's biology at its most efficient, years of invisible preparation leading to one sudden, spectacular emergence. The mushroom was always there, waiting patiently beneath your feet for the perfect moment to rise into the light and release its spores before disappearing again. Long before synthetic dyes were invented, humans discovered that mushrooms could color fabric with remarkable beauty and permanence. Different species produce different pigments, shades of gold, green, purple, red, orange, even deep blues that rival any synthetic color. The compounds responsible for these colors are tucked away in the mushroom's tissues, and when boiled with wool or silk, they release pigments that bind to the fibers, creating dyes that are natural, renewable, and often surprisingly light-fast, meaning they don't fade quickly in sunlight. Some mushroom dyers still practice this ancient craft, foraging in forests for species like Phaeolus schweintzii, known as the dyer's polypore, which produces rich yellow and orange tones that can shift to green depending on the mordant, the chemical used to fix the dye. Other species create delicate pinks, deep purples, warm browns. Each mushroom contains its own unique chemistry, its own palette of colors waiting to be extracted. Wearing clothing dyed with mushrooms once meant carrying a piece of the forest with you, literally, its pigments woven into the fabric you wore every day. Even today, artisans are reviving these techniques, celebrating fungi not just as food or medicine, but as artists of color, as natural sources of beauty that don't require petroleum or toxic chemicals. When you hold a skein of wool dyed with mushrooms, it feels connected to the earth in a way that synthetic colors never quite achieve. Each shade a gift from organisms that have been perfecting their chemistry for millions of years. But not all mushrooms are content to wait passively for animals to disperse their spores. Some have evolved into hunters, active predators in the microscopic world of soil. Certain fungi that live in the ground have developed ways to trap and consume nematodes, tiny thread-like worms that wriggle through soil in vast numbers, mostly invisible to the human eye. These predatory fungi construct microscopic snares, sticky nets that catch passing worms, or elegant lasso-shaped rings that function like nooses, tightening when touched by a nematode's body. Once caught, the worm cannot escape. The fungus then penetrates the nematode's body with specialized cells, releasing enzymes that digest the worm from the inside, absorbing its nutrients to fuel fungal growth. To think of mushrooms as predators, actively hunting and killing other organisms, changes how we imagine them. They're not just passive recyclers sitting quietly in leaf litter. They're cunning survivors, capable of sophisticated behavior, despite having no brain, no eyes, no nervous system. Beneath your feet, in soil that looks peaceful and still, there may be entire battlefields where fungi and worms engage in life and death struggles, unseen dramas playing out in spaces too small for us to see without microscopes. Each victory, each captured nematode feeds the slow, patient expansion of the fungal network, another tiny success in the endless competition for resources that drives all life. And despite their delicate appearance, mushrooms can be astonishingly strong. The fine threads of mycelium, when woven together into a dense network, create a structure that rivals some of the toughest materials known to engineering. Tests have shown that certain mycelium composites can actually be stronger than steel when measured by weight, meaning a given mass of mycelium can support more weight than the same mass of steel. This strength, combined with the fact that mycelium is lightweight, biodegradable, and can be grown quickly using agricultural waste as food, has made fungi a focus of cutting-edge material science. Designers and engineers are experimenting with mushroom-based building materials, creating bricks, insulation panels, even furniture that are durable, fire-resistant, and completely compostable when no longer needed. Imagine a future where buildings grow rather than being constructed, where walls are made of mycelium instead of concrete, where furniture returns to the earth when you're done with it rather than sitting in a landfill for centuries. It's remarkable to think that what looks like a fragile toadstool in the forest can inspire materials strong enough to support houses and buildings. Mushrooms remind us that strength isn't always loud or obvious, that resilience can be woven silently, fiber by fiber, into networks that are humble in appearance but extraordinary in their structural integrity. Nature has been engineering with mycelium for hundreds of millions of years, perfecting designs that we're only now beginning to understand and appreciate. And mushrooms were also among the very first organisms to colonize land. Long before trees stretched towards the sky, before flowers opened their petals, before grass covered hills, fungi had already made the journey from water to land. Fossil evidence shows that fungi were present on land over 1 billion years ago, making them true pioneers of terrestrial life. They began breaking down rock into soil, creating the conditions that would eventually allow plants to follow. Some scientists even believe that enormous fungal structures once dominated the land hundreds of millions of years ago, before plants evolved into forests. These strange organisms, called prototaxites, may have stood over 20 feet tall, pillar-like structures reaching towards the sky in a barren ground that looked nothing like what we know today. Imagine an alien landscape, rocky and brown, where the tallest living things weren't trees, but giant mushrooms, pillar-like structures reaching towards the sky. This was Earth before forests, before meadows, a time when fungi were the giants, the dominant large organisms shaping the land. Without fungi paving the way, breaking down rock, building soil, creating the foundation, the green world we know might never have emerged. They were the quiet pioneers of land life, patient architects shaping the planet with persistence measured in geological time. Every tree, every flower, every blade of grass exists because fungi did the hard work first, preparing the world for life to flourish. And fungi exist at both extremes of the size spectrum. Some mushrooms are so tiny they can balance easily on the head of a pin. These miniature fungi sprout on decaying leaves or bits of wood, often visible only with a magnifying glass or microscope. Despite their microscopic size, they still perform the same essential work as larger mushrooms, breaking down organic matter, releasing spores, participating in the great cycles of decomposition and renewal that keep ecosystems functioning. Many create delicate, almost crystalline structures, tiny caps and stems no bigger than grains of sugar, perfect in their miniature detail. To know that such fragile, fleeting life forms exist all around us, mostly unseen, is humbling. The Earth isn't only filled with towering trees and large mushrooms, it's also full of tiny realms of life thriving in spaces too small for our eyes to notice without help. At the opposite end, some mushrooms grow to astonishing sizes that rival large animals. The giant puffball, for example, can swell to the size of a beach ball or even larger, with some specimens weighing over 20 pounds. In tropical forests, massive bracket fungi cling to tree trunks like natural shelves, some growing wide enough to sit on, with their surfaces marked with growth rings like trees, recording years or decades of steady expansion. These giant mushrooms inspired awe and fear in folklore, seeming more like creatures from myth than simple fungi. To stand before one of these enormous specimens is to be reminded that mushrooms occupy a kingdom of extremes, from the nearly invisible to the impressively vast. They can be as small as a speck of dust or as large as a beach ball, ephemeral organisms that last only hours, or ancient structures that persist for decades. In this range, this flexibility lies part of their success as a group. Fungi have found ways to thrive at every scale, in every environment, adapting to niches from the microscopic to the monumental. And then there's the strange power of scent. Truffles, those prized underground mushrooms that can sell for thousands of dollars per pound, emit an aroma so powerful it affects both humans and animals in profound ways. The scent contains compounds chemically similar to pheromones, the signals many animals use for communication and mating. For pigs especially, the smell of truffles is almost irresistible, so much so that farmers once relied entirely on pigs to locate truffles buried beneath soil and leaf litter. The pigs would become so excited by the scent, they'd dig frantically to reach the source, which is why truffle hunters now prefer trained dogs. They can detect the aroma just as well, but are less likely to eat the valuable find. Even humans aren't immune to the allure. Truffles are among the most expensive foods in the world, valued precisely for their musky, earthy, complex aroma that seems to combine elements of garlic, earth, aged cheese, and something indefinably exotic. Chefs describe the scent as intoxicating, as transformative, a few shavings enough to elevate an entire dish. The smell wafts through soil, drawing animals that dig up the truffles and unknowingly spread the spores attached to the truffle's surface, completing the fungus's reproductive strategy. This lure is so compelling that entire species, from wild boars to certain insects, have evolved behaviors around it. The truffle grows hidden underground where it can't release spores into the air like other mushrooms, so instead it uses perfume, a chemical strategy so effective that humans have joined the list of creatures driven to seek it out. Deep in the forest, beneath our awareness, trees are engaged in constant conversation, and fungi make it possible. Mycorrhizal fungi form partnerships with tree roots, their mycelial networks extending far beyond where roots can reach, connecting individual trees into vast underground networks of exchange. Through these fungal highways, trees share resources in ways that seem almost cooperative, almost social. A large tree growing in full sunlight might send excess sugars down to its roots, and the fungi transfer some of those sugars to a younger tree struggling in shade, essentially feeding its neighbor through the network. When pests attack or disease threatens, chemical warning signals can spread through the fungal network, alerting neighboring trees to increase their defenses, to produce compounds that make their leaves less palatable or their bark more resistant. This hidden system has been called the wood wide web, and the name captures something important about how forests actually work. They're not collections of individual trees competing ruthlessly for resources. They're interconnected communities where cooperation and mutual support happen constantly, mediated by fungal networks that act as translators, as couriers, as the infrastructure holding the community together. Old trees, sometimes called mother trees, can use these networks to nurture their own offspring, directing resources to their seedlings, giving them a better chance of survival in the challenging conditions of the forest floor. When a tree is dying, it can even pass its remaining resources through the network to its neighbors, leaving a kind of inheritance, a final contribution to the forest that sustained it. What we see above ground, the trunks and branches and leaves catching sunlight, is only half the story. Below, in darkness, in soil, the fungal kingdom weaves a web as intricate as the neural networks in animal brains, creating connections, enabling communication, sustaining a form of forest intelligence that we're only beginning to understand. The next time you walk among trees, remember that you're moving through not just a collection of individuals, but a community, a network, an almost living system where fungi are the essential connectors, the hidden partners that make the whole thing work. And fungi play a crucial role in something that affects all of us, climate. Through their partnerships with plants, fungi help move carbon from the atmosphere into the soil, locking it away underground in their mycelial networks. Some of this carbon can remain buried for centuries, safely stored instead of contributing to atmospheric warming. As plants photosynthesize, they pull carbon dioxide from the air and convert it into sugars. Some of those sugars go to the mycorrhizal fungi, which use them for energy and growth, but also incorporate the carbon into their structures, into the soil itself. In this way, fungi act as allies in stabilizing Earth's climate, preventing excess carbon dioxide from heating the planet too quickly. Forests owe much of their effectiveness as carbon sinks not just to the trees, but to the fungal webs beneath them that keep nutrients flowing and carbon stored. Even when fungi decompose dead matter, they regulate how quickly carbon is released back into the air, acting as a kind of valve that controls the pace of decay. In a time when climate change dominates human concern, when we're desperately seeking ways to pull carbon from the atmosphere, the humble mushroom may prove to be one of Earth's most effective natural tools, working silently beneath the soil to maintain balance in the global carbon cycle. Solutions to our climate crisis may already exist, woven into the ancient partnerships between plants and fungi, waiting for us to recognize and protect them. Some mushrooms have evolved to thrive in places most organisms would avoid entirely. Species like Coprinopsis grow directly from animal dung, sprouting from the manure of cows, horses, rabbits, almost any herbivore. This seems unappealing to humans, but it's actually an ingenious ecological strategy. Dung is rich in nutrients that have already been partially broken down by the animal's digestive system, making it an ideal food source for fungi equipped to handle it. And fungi don't just consume the dung, they complete the cycle of life, breaking it down further and transforming waste into fertile soil that feeds plants, which feed animals, which produce more dung, and the cycle continues. Some of these dung-loving mushrooms have even evolved mechanisms to shoot their spores with remarkable force, launching them several feet into the air to escape the shadow of the dung pile and land on fresh grass where grazing animals will eat them, carrying the spores through their digestive system and depositing them elsewhere, beginning the cycle again. What seems unpleasant or even disgusting to us is to fungi pure opportunity. In their world, nothing is wasted. Every material, no matter how unlikely, can be recycled and transformed. The mushrooms that fruit from a pile of manure are participating in one of nature's most essential processes, turning the end products of digestion back into the building blocks of new growth. Other mushrooms take a completely different approach. They wait for fire. These pyrophilous fungi, fire lovers, remain dormant in soil until flames sweep through a forest, clearing away vegetation and leaving behind ash and charred wood. Then, almost magically, they spring to life. Morel mushrooms, prized by foragers for their distinctive honeycomb caps and rich flavor, are famous for fruiting abundantly in recently burned areas. Fire changes the chemistry of soil, altering pH levels, releasing nutrients locked in wood and plants, creating conditions that these specialized fungi require to fruit. Areas that were devastated by wildfire can become treasure troves for mushroom hunters the following spring, the blackened ground dotted with morels rising like small gifts from the ashes. But beyond human appreciation, these fire-following fungi play an ecological role. They recycle nutrients rapidly, processing the remains of burned vegetation and making those nutrients available to the new plants that will colonize the area. They help forests recover from what seems like total destruction, turning loss into fertile ground for rebirth and renewal. Where flames have consumed everything, mushrooms are often the first responders, arriving quickly to begin the work of transformation, of healing, of preparing the ground for the next generation of forest. In their quiet way, they remind us that destruction and creation are not opposites, but partners in the endless cycles of nature, that endings are also beginnings, that from ashes and loss, new life inevitably emerges.
Long before modern medicine, fungi were already chemists, producing sophisticated compounds to defend themselves against bacteria and other microbes that might compete with them or attack them. Many of these fungal compounds turned out to be useful for humans as well, once we learned to recognize and extract them. Penicillin, the antibiotic that revolutionized medicine and saved countless millions of lives, was discovered in a mold, a close relative of mushrooms. But mushrooms themselves also produce antimicrobial substances, compounds that kill or inhibit bacteria, and scientists are actively studying these substances as potential treatments for infections, especially as antibiotic resistance becomes an increasingly serious problem in human medicine. In the wild, these compounds help fungi survive in environments teeming with competitors, microscopic battlegrounds where bacteria and other organisms fight for the same resources. For us, they represent hope, reminders that solutions to human problems often already exist in nature, developed over millions of years of evolution, waiting quietly to be noticed and understood. The next time you see a mushroom growing from a fallen log, rotting wood in a damp forest, imagine it as a tiny chemical laboratory synthesizing compounds not just for its own survival, but perhaps for the healing of creatures it will never know, including us. Nature is generous in unexpected ways, offering tools and medicines to those patient enough to observe and learn. Without fungi, two of humanity's most beloved foods wouldn't exist at all: bread and beer. The everyday miracle of watching dough rise in a warm kitchen or beer foam in a cold glass is made possible by yeast, single-celled fungi that are cousins to mushrooms. Yeast performs fermentation, consuming sugars and releasing carbon dioxide and alcohol as byproducts. In bread dough, the carbon dioxide gets trapped in the gluten network, creating bubbles that make bread light and fluffy. In beer and wine, the alcohol is the point, though the carbon dioxide creates pleasant fizz and foam as well. Without fungi working this transformation, human cuisine would be profoundly different. No loaves of warm bread, no pizza crust, no wine, no beer, no champagne, no sake. Archaeological evidence shows that humans have been partnering with fungi for fermentation for at least 10,000 years, possibly longer. Ancient Egyptians baked leavened bread, though they didn't understand why dough rose or why their beer fermented. They just knew it worked. In a sense, fungi have shaped human culture as much as they've shaped forests, influencing our rituals, our celebrations, our daily lives. When you tear open a fresh loaf of bread and breathe in that yeasty aroma, or when you sip a drink and taste the complex flavors created by fermentation, you're experiencing the invisible work of fungi, billions of cells consuming sugars and transforming them into substances humans have treasured since we first discovered their effects. It's a partnership as old as civilization, written into our history, our traditions, our most fundamental foods. The yeast that makes this possible is alive, actually alive, even though we often forget that when we sprinkle it from a packet or stir it into flour. These microscopic fungi feed on sugars, multiplying rapidly in the right conditions, their populations doubling every few hours. They were almost certainly first discovered by accident, wild yeast floating in the air, landing on crushed grapes or damp grain, triggering spontaneous fermentation that ancient people noticed and eventually learned to control and cultivate. Over millennia, humans bred yeast strains for specific purposes, selecting for yeasts that produce the flavors we want, that tolerate higher alcohol levels, that work efficiently at different temperatures. Modern industrial yeast strains are highly specialized, but they remain members of the fungal kingdom, relatives of the mushrooms that pop up after rain. In every loaf of bread, every bottle of wine, there's a quiet fungal story happening, billions of cells working together, consuming, growing, releasing gases and alcohols, turning simple ingredients into something greater than the sum of their parts. It's alchemy performed by organisms so small we need microscopes to see them individually, yet their collective impact on human culture is immeasurable. Some mushrooms look like they're bleeding when you touch them. In forests, you might encounter a mushroom that seems wounded, bright red liquid beading on its cap like drops of blood. One famous example is Hydnellum pecki, sometimes called the bleeding tooth fungus because of its white surface dotted with red exudate that looks disturbingly like blood oozing from wounds. Despite the unsettling appearance, the red fluid isn't blood at all. It's a sap-like substance the mushroom produces, rich in pigments and various chemical compounds. Scientists are still debating why some mushrooms produce this exudate. It may help regulate moisture, or it might contain compounds that deter insects and animals from eating the mushroom. To encounter one of these bleeding mushrooms feels uncanny, as though nature is playing tricks, imitating something familiar in a strange context. These fungi remind us that the forest holds secrets not designed for human interpretation. Strategies and appearances evolved for completely different purposes that just happen to trigger our pattern recognition, our tendency to see the familiar in the unfamiliar. We're accidental witnesses to a world where even mushrooms can seem to bleed, where chemistry creates illusions, where nothing is quite what it first appears to be. On the opposite end of the sensory spectrum, some mushrooms smell revolting, like rotting flesh. Stinkhorn mushrooms emit an odor nearly identical to decaying meat, so powerful it can make humans gag. But this stench is actually a sophisticated lure. The smell attracts flies and beetles, insects that normally feed on carrion. They land on the mushroom, drawn by the scent, and become covered in the mushroom's spores, which they then carry away as they fly off, spreading the fungus far more effectively than wind ever could. It's an ingenious strategy, evolution turning repulsion into a reproductive advantage. To humans, the smell is awful, overwhelming, something to avoid. To the mushroom, it's an advertisement, a carefully crafted signal that brings exactly the pollinators it needs. In some cultures, stinkhorns were associated with bad omens or evil spirits, their sudden appearance and foul smell linked to supernatural explanations. But they're simply clever survivors using chemistry to manipulate insect behavior. In the stillness of a forest morning, the sudden whiff of decay might not signal death at all, but rather life, a mushroom in the process of reproduction, playing on the senses of every creature that passes, using disgust as a tool for survival. The forest is full of these strategies, organisms communicating in languages of scent and sight, and we're just bystanders, misinterpreting signals never meant for us. Beneath the soil, mycelium doesn't just grow randomly, it builds complex, organized networks that resemble cities in their efficiency and structure. Fungal highways branch and reconnect, creating channels where nutrients flow along optimal paths. Some areas function like marketplaces where resources are exchanged with plant roots, sugars traded for minerals in ancient partnerships. Other zones act as storage facilities, reserves held against times of scarcity. Scientists using advanced imaging techniques have discovered that these networks display remarkable sophistication, optimizing their growth patterns much like engineers designing road systems or utility networks, finding efficient solutions to the problem of moving resources across distances. In a way, fungi are natural engineers, constructing hidden architectures beneath our feet that rival human infrastructure in complexity and effectiveness. While we build roads and cities above ground, the fungal kingdom weaves intricate worlds below, invisible metropolises where billions of organisms cooperate and interact. The soil beneath your feet isn't empty dirt, it's alive, filled with a society of threads, a city without walls, pulsing with the exchange of nutrients and information, glowing softly, if you could see it, with the business of life. To walk across grass or through forest is to walk across the roof of this hidden civilization, a vast underground network that has been operating far longer than human cities have existed. Some mushrooms have the remarkable ability to change color when touched or cut. In the fungal world, appearances can shift in an instant. Certain bolates, when their flesh is bruised or exposed to air, turn a vivid cobalt blue within seconds, as if you've broken open something magical. This color change results from chemical reactions between compounds in the mushroom and oxygen, oxidation causing pigments to transform. For mushroom foragers, these color changes can be important identification clues. Though they don't always indicate whether a mushroom is edible or poisonous, they're just part of the mushroom's chemistry. The effect can be startling, almost unreal. You cut into a plain-looking mushroom, and suddenly it's transformed, brilliant blue or red or purple spreading across the flesh like living watercolor. In folklore, mushrooms that changed color were thought to be enchanted, carrying secret powers or magical properties. To touch one today is to experience a flash of that same wonder, the simple act of contact revealing something hidden, a trick of chemistry disguised as magic, the forest showing you one of its small secrets in exchange for your attention. Not all mushroom scents are unpleasant or neutral. Some release fragrances so delightful they seem designed to bring joy. The candy cap mushroom carries a scent almost identical to maple syrup, sweet and warm, like pancakes on a Sunday morning. When dried, the aroma intensifies, filling entire rooms with that distinctive sweetness. Chefs have discovered these mushrooms and now use them in desserts, cookies, ice creams, savory sweet dishes that blur the boundaries between forest and kitchen. The smell comes from compounds called sodalon, molecules that trick our brains into recognizing sweetness even though there's no sugar present, just chemistry creating an illusion of flavor. To find one in the wild is like discovering a hidden bakery in the forest, an unexpected gift of scent that seems almost too perfect to be natural. Other mushrooms smell like coconut, like almonds, like cinnamon or anise, each one a different note in the forest's invisible symphony of aromas. These scents aren't random, they serve purposes, attracting helpful insects or deterring harmful ones. But to humans, they register as delight, as beauty, as reminders that the natural world is full of unexpected pleasures for those patient enough to notice. Mushrooms are chemists working with palettes of scent molecules, creating fragrances that overlap with our own memories of food and comfort, building bridges between their needs and our senses. Few foods naturally contain vitamin D, that essential nutrient that strengthens bones and supports immune function, but mushrooms have a remarkable secret. Like us, they can produce vitamin D when exposed to ultraviolet light. When sunlight touches a mushroom's skin, compounds inside undergo a transformation, converting into vitamin D through the same basic chemistry that happens in human skin. This means that mushrooms exposed to sun contain significant amounts of this vital nutrient. Some cultures traditionally placed harvested mushrooms in sunlight before cupping, instinctively understanding that sun-dried mushrooms offered something valuable, though they didn't know the biochemistry behind it. A handful of sun-exposed mushrooms can contain as much vitamin D as a supplement pill, making them one of the few non-animal food sources of this nutrient. It's astonishing that mushrooms and humans share this ability, both relying on the same fundamental chemistry involving light and certain molecular precursors. In forests, mushrooms might seem far removed from the sun, growing in shade and shadow, But when they do catch rays of light, they store that solar energy in chemical form, becoming not just food, but medicine, bridges connecting light, earth, and human health in chains of transformation we're still learning to appreciate fully. Some mushrooms combine poison and beauty in ways that are both enchanting and dangerous. Bioluminescent mushrooms emit soft green or blue light through chemical reactions involving luciferin, the same compound that makes fireflies glow. But some of these glowing species also contain toxins that protect them from being eaten. Their light isn't just beautiful, it may serve as a warning, a signal that says, "I glow because I'm dangerous, stay away." The eerie shine is most visible at night when patches of forest floor shimmer with faint, ghostly radiance, mushrooms that are literally illuminated from within by their own chemistry. To see one of these glowing, toxic mushrooms is to witness nature's complexity, defense and attraction intertwined, beauty serving as both lure and warning depending on the observer. In folklore, glowing fungi were taken as signs of spirits or supernatural presence, their strange light seeming too otherworldly to be natural. Today, we understand the chemistry, but wonder remains. Life has found ways to turn danger into light, to make poison beautiful, to exist at the intersection of threat and grace. It's a reminder that nature operates by its own logic, where what attracts might also harm, where beauty can be a mask for something deadly, and appreciation requires respect, distance, careful observation. Among the deadliest organisms on the planet is the death cap mushroom, Amanita phalloides, which contains amatoxin, one of the most powerful poisons known. Just half a mushroom cap, sometimes even less, contains enough toxin to kill a healthy adult human being. The truly frightening aspect is the delay. Symptoms may not appear for 6 to 12 hours after eating, sometimes longer, a deceptive period where victims feel fine and assume they're safe. But during that time, the toxins are spreading through the bloodstream, targeting liver and kidneys, causing cellular damage that becomes irreversible. When symptoms finally appear, nausea, vomiting, severe abdominal pain, it's often too late for effective treatment. There's no antidote, no way to neutralize the poison once it's been absorbed. Medical teams can provide aggressive supportive care, fluids, medications to protect organs, sometimes emergency liver transplants. But survival is far from guaranteed, even with the best treatment. Throughout history, death caps have killed countless people, from Roman emperors assassinated with poisoned meals to modern foragers who made tragic identification mistakes. The mushroom looks deceptively ordinary, pale greenish cap, white stalk, nothing obviously alarming about its appearance, which makes it even more dangerous. The fact that such lethal chemistry exists in something so fragile, something you could crush with your fingers, reminds us that nature doesn't organize itself for human safety or convenience. Beauty and terror live side by side in the forest, sometimes in the same species, and our survival depends on knowledge, caution, respect for forces we don't control. The death cap is a reminder that the natural world, for all its wonder, demands humility from those who enter it, that we must approach with care and understanding, that assumptions can be fatal. But fungi have also saved countless lives. In the 19th century, cholera swept through cities worldwide, killing millions, a terrifying disease for which there was no effective treatment. One unlikely source of hope came from the fungal kingdom. A fungus called penicillium, a close relative of the mold that would later give us penicillin, was found to inhibit the cholera bacterium. The discovery wasn't fully understood at the time, and it took decades before antibiotics were properly developed.
but it provided early evidence of fungi's medicinal powers, hints that these organisms produced compounds that could fight diseases that killed humans by the millions. Later discoveries confirmed what that early observation suggested. Fungi carry within them chemicals that can change the course of human history. Imagine entire cities gripped by epidemic fear, death tolls climbing daily, medical knowledge helpless against the disease, and then finding that something growing on old bread or damp walls might hold the key to survival. It was a quiet foreshadowing of the antibiotic revolution that would come decades later, proof that mushrooms and their relatives could stand between humanity and its deadliest enemies, that solutions to our most desperate problems might come from the humblest, overlooked sources.
Fungi might seem simple, but they demonstrate something that looks remarkably like memory. In laboratory settings, researchers have found that fungal networks exposed to certain environmental changes, like temperature shifts or variations in nutrient availability, respond differently when those same conditions return later. The mycelium seems to learn from past experiences, adjusting more quickly the second time around, as if remembering what happened before. This isn't memory in the human sense. There's no brain, no neurons, no consciousness as we understand it. But it is a form of biological recall, information encoded somehow in the structure or chemistry of the fungal network, allowing it to adapt based on experience. This ability may help explain why fungi are among the most resilient, successful life forms on Earth. They can sense patterns in their environment, remember, adjust their behavior accordingly, responding to rhythms of rain and drought, warmth and cold, abundance and scarcity. To walk through a forest is to move through a landscape that remembers, networks of fungi beneath your feet carrying information about storms that passed years ago, droughts endured, fires survived, all encoded in living threads that adjust constantly based on accumulated experience. It's as if the soil itself has memory, a patient archive of environmental history written in fungal tissue, helping ecosystems survive by learning from the past. In the depths of winter, when ground freezes solid and snow blankets the land, you might think mushrooms disappear entirely, but certain species are astonishingly resistant to cold. Some can freeze completely solid, their internal water turning to ice crystals, and yet survive, resuming growth when conditions improve. Others continue fruiting even in freezing temperatures, pushing small caps through frost and snow as if winter didn't affect them. Their resilience comes from compounds that act like natural antifreeze, protecting cellular structures from damage caused by ice formation. These substances prevent sharp ice crystals from puncturing cell membranes, allowing the organism to survive conditions that would destroy most life. For creatures that look so delicate, this toughness is extraordinary. It means fungi can colonize some of Earth's harshest environments: Arctic tundra, alpine peaks, places where temperatures plunge far below freezing for months at a time. To stumble upon a mushroom pushing through snow is to see defiance in its purest form, life persisting quietly in conditions that seem incompatible with existence. They're reminders that even in the coldest, bleakest places, hidden kingdoms continue their work, patient and persistent, waiting for seasons to turn, but surviving regardless, testimony to the incredible resilience that evolution can produce. For thousands of years, across countless cultures, mushrooms have been revered as medicine. In traditional Chinese medicine, reishi mushrooms are called the mushroom of immortality, believed to enhance longevity and vitality, to strengthen the body's life force. In Japan, shiitake mushrooms were once reserved for nobility, considered too valuable for common people, used as tonics for health and vigor. Indigenous peoples in Siberia, North America, Africa, all developed their own fungal medicines, brewing teas from certain species, making poultices from others, using them to treat everything from wounds to fevers to chronic fatigue. Modern science is now confirming what traditional healers sensed through centuries of observation. Compounds in mushrooms have been found to boost immune function, reduce inflammation, even fight cancer cells in laboratory studies. Lion's mane mushroom, with its cascading white spines resembling a waterfall frozen in time, has shown remarkable properties in animal studies. Compounds within it can stimulate the growth of nerve cells, encouraging the production of nerve growth factor, a molecule crucial for maintaining and repairing neurons. This has sparked intense interest in lion's mane as a potential therapy for neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, conditions that rob people of their memories and abilities. For centuries, it was used in Asian medicine as a brain tonic, and now modern research is beginning to understand why. Imagine a mushroom, soft and delicate-looking, carrying inside it the potential to heal the most complex structures in the human body, the intricate networks of the brain and nervous system. It's a reminder that answers to our deepest medical challenges may still be hiding in forests, waiting patiently to be discovered, that nature has been running experiments in biochemistry for millions of years longer than human science has existed, and the results of those experiments might save lives if we're wise enough to look for them. Puffball mushrooms hold a special kind of magic in their simple spherical forms. When mature, they fill with millions of spores, dry powder waiting for the right trigger. A single raindrop, a falling leaf, a curious animal's paw, or a human's gentle touch can cause them to release, sending a smoky burst of spores into the air. What looks like smoke is actually a cloud of possibilities, each microscopic spore a potential new mushroom, drifting away on wind currents, traveling sometimes for miles before settling. For children and adults alike, puffballs often become sources of delight, natural toys that produce satisfying puffs when squeezed, living fireworks on a miniature scale. But beyond the immediate wonder, this strategy is deeply effective. In a single release, trillions of spores may be carried away, scattered across the landscape, vastly increasing the odds that at least a few will land in suitable conditions and grow. To witness one erupt is to see life's persistence in action, a strategy refined over millions of years, simple in execution but profound in its effectiveness. The soil floor becomes a launchpad, mushrooms sending their offspring into the world on currents of air, trusting in numbers and chance, in the ancient logic of reproduction that favors abundance over careful placement. Every autumn, when leaves carpet the ground in layers of red and gold and brown, fungi begin their essential work. Without them, forests would suffocate beneath their own debris, leaf litter and fallen branches piling endlessly, nutrients locked away in dead material, unavailable to living plants. Fungi secrete powerful enzymes that can break down cellulose and lignin, the tough structural compounds that give wood and leaves their strength. What seems like decay is actually an elegant recycling system, complex organic molecules being dismantled and transformed into simpler compounds, nutrients released back into soil where plant roots can absorb them, completing the cycle. Every flower that blooms in spring, every seedling that pushes through soil, every blade of grass that rises owes its existence in part to this process, to fungi working patiently to transform death into life. To walk through autumn woods is to move across an invisible economy powered by mushrooms, where every fallen leaf becomes currency in transactions that sustain the entire ecosystem. Nothing is wasted, nothing is permanent. Everything flows through cycles of growth and decay and growth again, and fungi are the essential workers maintaining these cycles, ensuring that life continues, that nutrients keep moving, that the forest renews itself season after season.
Without fungi, life on Earth would drown in its own past. Every year, billions of leaves fall, branches break and crash to the ground, trees topple in storms, animals die, and their bodies settle into soil and grass. If fungi vanished, all of this organic matter would simply accumulate, piling higher and higher, layer upon layer, until the planet was buried beneath mountains of undecayed debris. The cycles of renewal would grind to a halt. Forests would choke on their own fallen wood, unable to break it down, unable to access the nutrients locked inside dead tissue. Plants would starve in soil depleted of minerals, surrounded by wealth they couldn't access. Fungi are the great recyclers, the essential workers that keep Earth's ecosystems functioning. They secrete enzymes powerful enough to dismantle the toughest molecules, breaking down what seems permanent and solid into components that can be used again. They turn the final into the beginning, death into life, endings into new starts. If fungi were to disappear, the consequences would be catastrophic and rapid. Within years, forests would begin to fail. Within decades, most terrestrial ecosystems would collapse. Every step you take on soft forest floor, every garden path you walk, every meadow you cross exists only because fungal threads have worked tirelessly beneath the surface, dissolving yesterday's remains into tomorrow's growth. In silence and extraordinary patience, fungi keep the earth breathable, livable, constantly renewing. They're the unseen caretakers, preventing the world from drowning in its own history, ensuring that matter keeps moving through cycles, that nothing is truly wasted, that life continues in its endless transformations. To understand this is to realize that mushrooms aren't decorative additions to forests or interesting curiosities. They're fundamental to how life works on this planet, as essential as sunlight or water or air. Some mushrooms remain invisible until darkness falls, blending perfectly with their surroundings during daylight hours. But when night arrives, they reveal their secret, bioluminescence, glowing softly in shades of green, blue, or pale yellow, emerging from shadows like ghostly lanterns scattered across the forest floor. To encounter one during a night walk is to feel you've stepped into another realm, a place where mushrooms light their own way, where the ordinary rules seem temporarily suspended. The glow comes from delicate chemical reactions within their cells, luciferin combining with luciferase in the presence of oxygen, releasing light without heat, a cool radiance that seems almost supernatural. Some species conserve energy by glowing only at night, their luminescence timed to the hours when insects are most active, maximizing the chances that their light will attract the pollinators they need. It's as though they perform solely for darkness, for the hours when their glow can be seen most clearly. For centuries, these glowing fungi inspired myths and legends, stories of forest spirits guiding lost travelers or leading them astray, of fairy lights dancing between trees, of magic lingering in wild places. Today, we understand the chemistry behind the glow, but it still stirs something ancient in us, proving that the forest has its own sources of light, its own lanterns that switch on when stars come out, reminding us that beauty and strangeness exist everywhere if we're willing to look, if we're patient enough to wait for darkness and see what it reveals. Lichens, those colorful crusts and frills clinging to rocks and tree bark, aren't single organisms at all, but partnerships between fungi and algae or cyanobacteria. The fungus provides structure, protection, moisture retention, creating a stable environment. The algae or bacteria provide food through photosynthesis, capturing sunlight and converting it into sugars that sustain both partners. Together, they create entirely new forms of life, capable of surviving in extreme places where neither partner could thrive alone. Arctic tundra, where temperatures rarely rise above freezing, bare cliff faces exposed to wind and sun, deserts where rain comes perhaps once a year, even the vacuum of space in experiments testing life's limits. Lichens are among Earth's oldest and most successful colonizers, pioneer species that arrive first in barren places, beginning the slow work of breaking down rock into soil, preparing the ground for other life to follow. They paint the world with patches of orange, green, yellow, gray, adding color to landscapes that might otherwise be monotone. In essence, fungi aren't just recyclers or hunters, they're also farmers, cultivating their photosynthetic partners in one of nature's earliest and most successful examples of cooperation across kingdoms of life. Each lichen is a quiet story of partnership, proof that survival often comes not from competition, but from working together, from finding ways to combine different strengths into something greater than either organism could achieve alone. Not every mushroom can be eaten raw, even when they're not poisonous. Some contain compounds that are mildly toxic or simply indigestible until heat breaks them down. Morels, highly prized by chefs and foragers, are one such example. Raw, they can cause stomach upset, nausea, discomfort, but once cooked, sautéed in butter, or roasted until their honeycomb caps turn golden, they transform into delicacies with rich, nutty, earthy flavors that seem to capture the essence of spring forests. Others, like shiitake mushrooms, release their best flavors and nutritional compounds only when heat unlocks their chemistry, transforming them from tough and bland to tender and aromatic. As though fire completes their story, turning potential danger or blandness into nourishment and delight. For foragers and cooks, this knowledge has been passed down through generations, an understanding that the right preparation can turn something questionable into something wonderful. The transformation feels almost alchemical, the simple application of heat converting uncertainty into safety, raw into cooked, inedible into delicious. Mushrooms remind us that food isn't always straightforward, that it sometimes requires knowledge, respect, ritual, proper treatment to unlock what lies hidden within, and that the journey from forest to table carries responsibilities and requires understanding of what you're handling. Not every mushroom wants to be eaten. Some defend themselves with flavors so intensely bitter that even hungry animals spit them out immediately. The bitter bolete looks remarkably similar to edible boletes, same general shape and size, but delivers a taste so acrid, so overwhelmingly unpleasant that a single bite can ruin an entire dish, leaving a lingering bitterness that's difficult to wash away. These defensive compounds are nature's way of saying no without resorting to deadly poisons, a warning system written in taste rather than toxicity. To humans, bitterness serves as a sensory alarm, an ancient signal telling us to stop, to reconsider, to not continue eating. In the fungal kingdom, it's one more tool in the arsenal of survival, effective and economical, requiring less metabolic investment than producing deadly toxins. Yet even these unpalatable mushrooms play important roles in ecosystems, recycling matter, forming partnerships with trees, contributing to soil health. They remind us that not everything in nature exists for human use or benefit, that taste itself is part of an ongoing conversation between species, a negotiation about who eats what, a boundary maintained through chemistry rather than physical defenses. The forest contains many things not meant for us, and that's as it should be, a healthy reminder of our place in a world where we're participants, not masters. Among the most famous and controversial mushrooms are those containing psilocybin, compounds that profoundly alter human consciousness. These chemicals can create visions, distort the perception of time and space, generate feelings of connection to something larger than the self, dissolve the boundaries between observer and observed. For thousands of years, such mushrooms were used in spiritual and shamanic rituals, ceremonies where they were believed to open doorways to the divine, to allow communication with ancestors or spirits, to provide healing for psychological and spiritual wounds. In recent decades, after years of prohibition and stigma, scientists have begun studying these mushrooms again with renewed interest and sophisticated methods. Research suggests they may help treat depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, conditions that resist conventional treatments. The fact that a mushroom can change consciousness so deeply, so rapidly, is both fascinating and unsettling. It suggests that our normal waking awareness is just one possible state among many, that fungi have evolved compounds capable of temporarily rewiring human neural networks, creating experiences that feel more real, more meaningful than everyday life. Whether seen as sacred medicines, dangerous drugs, or therapeutic tools, these mushrooms sit at a unique intersection of biology and mystery, carrying within their fragile caps the power to shift reality itself, to change how humans experience existence, to challenge fundamental assumptions about consciousness and self. They've inspired art, music, philosophy, religion, scientific inquiry, fear, and wonder in roughly equal measure. And they remind us that fungi don't exist solely to feed us, or heal us, or clean our environment. They also carry chemicals that can enter our brains and change how we think, feel, and perceive, making them unlike almost any other organism in our relationship with the natural world. In caves across Spain and Algeria, ancient paintings show human figures holding objects that many scholars interpret as mushrooms. These images, created thousands of years ago by our prehistoric ancestors, suggest that early humans didn't just gather mushrooms for food, but may have recognized something special about certain species, perhaps using them in spiritual or shamanic contexts. Some paintings show dancing figures surrounded by patterns and bursts of color that echo the kinds of visual experiences hallucinogenic mushrooms can produce: geometric patterns, flowing lines, vivid contrasts that don't appear in normal vision. While we can't be certain of the artist's intentions, the possibility that humans were exploring fungal altered states tens of thousands of years ago is tantalizing. It suggests that mushrooms have been shaping human culture, ritual, imagination, art, and spirituality from our very beginnings, long before written history, back when we were still painting on cave walls by firelight. To imagine those ancient people gathering in caves, consuming mushrooms, painting their visions on stone walls, is to feel a connection across vast gulfs of time, to recognize that the human relationship with fungi is ancient and deep, woven into our cultural DNA. The mushrooms that seemed magical to them still exist, still grow in forests, still contain the same compounds, and the questions they asked about consciousness, reality, meaning, the nature of existence are questions we're still asking today, still trying to answer, still using some of the same tools our ancestors used: fungi that bridge the ordinary and the extraordinary. In our modern world, drowning in plastic waste, fungi may offer unexpected solutions. Mycelium can be grown into molds, forming lightweight, durable packaging materials that look and function like styrofoam, but are completely biodegradable. Once used, they can be composted, breaking down in weeks rather than persisting for centuries like petroleum-based plastics. Companies are already experimenting with mushroom packaging for shipping electronics, cushioning fragile items, replacing foam insulation. The process uses agricultural waste, corn stalks, sawdust, materials that would otherwise be burned or buried, as food for the growing mycelium, making the entire system sustainable and circular. It's astonishing to think that the same organism that fruits mushrooms in forests could also protect your online purchases during shipping, cushion furniture, insulate buildings, all while leaving no pollution behind. Where plastic clings to Earth for centuries, breaking down into microplastics that contaminate oceans and food chains, fungal materials promise a different future. One where packaging returns harmlessly to soil when we're done with it, becoming food for plants rather than eternal garbage. Fungi offer hope that materials themselves can become part of natural cycles again, that human manufacturing doesn't have to mean permanent waste, that solutions to our pollution crisis might grow from spores in a matter of days. Researchers have discovered that certain types of mycelium resist flames naturally when grown into materials. Unlike wood that burns readily or plastics that ignite and release toxic smoke, mycelium composites char and smolder without producing dangerous gases, making them promising as eco-friendly insulation, furniture, even building materials. The secret lies in the chitin and complex polysaccharides that make up fungal cell walls, compounds that don't support combustion easily. Imagine walls lined with fungal networks, strong and safe, protecting homes from fire without requiring chemical flame retardants that can be harmful to human health. Nature, through fungi, has engineered a material humans are only beginning to appreciate fully, one that combines strength, lightweight, biodegradability, and fire resistance in a single package grown from waste products. Mycelium-based fireproofing could transform construction, making buildings both safer and more sustainable. to realize that the same threads that stitch together forest floors could also shield houses from flames is to see fungi's incredible versatility, to understand that this quiet kingdom offers tools for solving problems we haven't even fully recognized yet, solutions waiting in the patient growth of fungal networks that have been perfecting their chemistry for hundreds of millions of years. Leather has been valued for millennia for its strength and flexibility, but its production requires enormous resources: water, land, energy, and often involves significant animal suffering. Now, a new material called mycelium leather offers an alternative. Fungal mycelium can be grown in sheets, then treated and finished to mimic the look, feel, and properties of traditional leather. The result is durable, breathable, and entirely biodegradable. Designers are already creating shoes, handbags, jackets, furniture from this innovative material, proving it can match leather's aesthetic and functional qualities. Unlike animal hides that take months or years to produce, requiring vast amounts of feed and water, mycelium leather can be grown in weeks with minimal resources and no cruelty involved. Its texture can be adjusted, soft and suede-like or smooth and glossy, depending on how it's processed. To think that the same network forming mushrooms after rain can also become a jacket or chair is almost surreal, a reminder that fungi aren't only decomposers and recyclers, but also inventors, offering humanity materials that bridge beauty, ethics, and environmental responsibility. They're showing us that the things we value don't have to come from exploitation, that alternatives can be grown, literally cultivated from fungal threads, fed on sawdust and agricultural waste, transforming what we considered waste into what we consider luxury. In forests where winters are brutal and long, some mushrooms carry secrets that let them endure conditions that would kill most organisms. They produce antifreeze-like proteins and complex sugars that lower the freezing point of water inside their cells, preventing sharp ice crystals from forming and tearing delicate membranes. These compounds allow fungi to continue working even when air temperatures plunge far below zero, breaking down leaves and wood while most life lies dormant, keeping the cycles of decay moving slowly but steadily through the coldest months. More remarkably, some of these molecules can affect the environment around the mushroom, seeping into nearby soil, slightly loosening frost's grip in the immediate area, creating tiny pockets where ice doesn't form as easily. Researchers are studying these natural antifreezes as models for developing safer ways to protect crops from frost damage or to de-ice roads without the harsh chemicals currently used. It's humbling to imagine a mushroom no bigger than your hand, quietly reshaping its frozen surroundings through chemistry alone, reminding us that power and resilience often come in small, soft, overlooked packages, that survival in harsh conditions requires not brute strength, but cleverness, adaptation, molecular ingenuity developed over evolutionary time. Though fungi lack tools or muscles, they're extraordinary miners of minerals locked in stone. Some species release organic acids that slowly dissolve rock, patiently extracting nutrients like calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus from what seems like lifeless mineral. In doing so, they transform barren stone into fertile soil, creating the foundation for forests and grasslands, for all terrestrial life. This process likely began over 1 billion years ago, when fungi first colonized land, long before plants existed, spreading across rocky landscapes and beginning the slow work of weathering, of breaking down, of preparation. Even today, lichens, those partnerships between fungi and algae, etch their way across cliffs, gravestones, ancient monuments, tiny but utterly relentless. Over centuries, their work reshapes mountainsides, turns boulders into pebbles, creates soil where none existed. Scientists envision future biomining technologies inspired by fungi, using them to extract rare elements from ore with far less environmental damage than conventional mining causes, letting organisms do the work of separating valuable materials from rock without needing huge machines or toxic chemicals. To stand before a rocky outcrop and realize it's being quietly consumed, molecule by fungal acids you can't see, is to witness patience transformed into power, to understand that time itself can be a force when combined with persistence, that the softest organisms can reshape the hardest substances given enough time and the right chemistry. In places where human accidents created disasters, where nuclear reactors melted down or waste accumulated, mushrooms sometimes flourish in ways that seem impossible. At Chernobyl, scientists found fungi growing inside the ruined reactor itself, thriving in radiation levels that would kill humans in hours. These fungi contain melanin, the same pigment in our skin, but here it serves a completely different function. Instead of merely protecting against radiation, it appears to help convert radioactive energy into chemical energy the fungus can use, a bizarre process some researchers call radiosynthesis, like photosynthesis, but using deadly radiation instead of sunlight as the energy source. It's almost as if these mushrooms are eating danger, transforming what we consider lethal into fuel for growth. The implications are staggering. If we can understand how these fungi process radiation, we might develop ways to clean contaminated sites that are currently too dangerous for humans to enter, places that will remain hazardous for thousands of years unless we find solutions. We might even develop radiation shields for astronauts on long space voyages, protecting them from cosmic rays using fungal compounds or living fungal barriers. In humanity's most poisoned places, in the ruins of our worst mistakes, mushrooms have found ways not just to survive, but to thrive, turning catastrophe into opportunity, showing us that life is more adaptable than we ever imagined, that even our most dangerous creations can become resources for organisms clever enough to use them. When the first green plants left Earth's oceans to colonize land, they faced a world almost unimaginably harsh: bare rock, no soil, intense ultraviolet radiation, extreme temperature swings, and very few available nutrients. They would likely have failed if they'd been alone. But fossils reveal they weren't alone. Fungi were already there, already established, ready to form partnerships. These ancient alliances allowed plants to access nutrients from rock through fungal networks in exchange for sugars the plants produced through photosynthesis. Over time, this collaboration created the first soils, thin layers of organic matter mixed with weathered rock, making it possible for forests and grasslands to evolve and spread. Without fungi preparing the way, plants might never have successfully colonized land, and Earth might still be a barren world of rock and ocean, beautiful in its own way, but empty of the green abundance we know. Every tree, every flower, every blade of grass, every terrestrial animal, including humans, all carry the legacy of this ancient partnership. When you walk across a field today, you're walking on ground prepared by fungi hundreds of millions of years ago, foundations laid so long ago that continents have moved, mountains have risen and eroded, entire lineages of life have come and gone, but the partnership between plants and fungi continues, as essential now as it was at the beginning, a debt written into the very structure of terrestrial ecosystems. Though fungi we think of as forest dwellers, fungi also live in the ocean.
Marine fungi have been discovered living alongside corals, weaving unseen threads into the complex architecture of reefs, those underwater gardens that support thousands of species. These partnerships may help regulate nutrient flows, protect corals from pathogens, stabilize fragile reef ecosystems under stress from warming oceans and acidification. Though marine fungi are far less studied than their terrestrial cousins, they could be crucial to coral survival as climate change intensifies. To picture fungi drifting among coral polyps is to realize the fungal kingdom isn't limited to soil and trees. It extends into saltwater, stitching together life in oceans just as it does on land. If corals are the architects of reefs, creating the calcium carbonate structures that form the foundation, then fungi may be their partners and caretakers, helping them endure through services we're beginning to understand. Even beneath waves, in ecosystems that seem completely separate from forests, mushrooms and their kin remind us that life is never truly solitary, never isolated, always built upon partnerships and exchanges, cooperation woven into the fabric of existence at every level, from single cells to entire ecosystems spanning thousands of miles. Fungi are masters of reproductive flexibility, switching strategies depending on conditions. They can release spores asexually, creating countless genetic copies of themselves in efficient bursts, allowing rapid colonization of new territory, quick exploitation of available resources. But they can also reproduce sexually, exchanging genetic material with other individuals to create variation, mixing genes to produce offspring with new combinations of traits. This genetic diversity gives fungi adaptability to face changing conditions, new diseases, environmental shifts, threats that might wipe out a genetically uniform population, but leave varied populations with survivors. Some species switch between these strategies seasonally or based on resource availability, maximizing their chances under whatever circumstances they encounter. Imagine an organism with two entirely different reproductive modes, one for speed and one for resilience, one for colonizing and one for adapting, able to choose between them flexibly. It's a level of strategic sophistication few life forms possess. Each mushroom you see might be the result of asexual cloning, identical to its parent, or it might be a sexual offspring, a genetic mix combining traits from two parents, carrying new possibilities. This flexibility, this refusal to be locked into one approach, helps explain why fungi are so successful, so widespread, so resilient across hundreds of millions of years and countless environmental changes. In the fungal world, reproduction reaches dizzying levels of diversity. Some species have literally tens of thousands of mating types, what we might think of as genders, but far more complex. The split-gill mushroom, for example, may have more than 23,000 different mating types. These aren't genders in any sense humans would recognize, but rather compatibility codes, genetic markers that determine which individuals can successfully mate with which others. The system ensures that nearly any two individuals can mate, maximizing reproduction opportunities while preventing inbreeding. The effect is genetic diversity on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Where humans think of gender as simple, binary, or perhaps a spectrum, fungi explode the concept into tens of thousands of distinct categories, each one viable, each one part of the reproductive strategy. To contemplate a mushroom's mating system is to glimpse evolution's creativity, to see that life isn't bound by our categories or assumptions, that nature invents solutions we wouldn't think possible. For fungi, diversity isn't an exception or an accommodation, it's the fundamental rule, woven into their biology at the deepest levels, ensuring survival through variation, through the constant creation of new genetic combinations that might prove useful under future conditions no organism can predict. When a puffball reaches full maturity, it transforms into something remarkable, a sphere filled with trillions of spores, more spores than there have been humans who ever lived, all packed into a structure you could hold in both hands. A raindrop, a footstep, a branch falling, any disturbance can trigger the release, and suddenly a massive cloud erupts, smoky and thick, spores exploding into air currents that carry them away. What looks like a puff of dust is actually a storm of microscopic potential, each spore a complete genetic package capable of growing into a new organism if it lands in the right place. Most will die, landing on concrete or in water, or in soil too dry or too cold or too nutrient-poor to support growth. But that's the strategy: overwhelming probability through sheer numbers, sending out so many offspring that even if only a tiny fraction survives, it's enough to continue the lineage. Watching a puffball release its spores is like watching the forest breathe, a moment where invisibility becomes briefly visible, where potential scatters into the world in numbers so vast they defy imagination, where life's persistence manifests as a cloud drifting away on wind, carrying futures we'll never see, connections we'll never trace, stories that will unfold in places far from where they began. The fungal kingdom doesn't stop at forest floors. Spores rise on air currents, carried higher and higher until they drift far above cities, floating thousands of feet overhead, mingling with dust and pollen in the atmosphere. Studies have detected them in air samples taken from aircraft, present even at altitudes where you might think only air exists. Some spores get swept into clouds, incorporated into water droplets, falling later with rain onto landscapes hundreds or thousands of miles from where they started. Every breath you take in a city contains traces of these travelers, fragments of forests and fields far away, particles that began their journey days or weeks ago and are only now reaching your lungs. Even surrounded by concrete and steel, even in the heart of urban environments, we remain connected to the hidden fungal networks spreading across continents. The air itself is a bridge, carrying spores as constant messengers between ecosystems, between wild and urban, between the seen world and the hidden one. The next time you walk down a busy street, surrounded by buildings and traffic, remember that the fungal kingdom is there with you, drifting invisibly overhead, linking your breath to forests you may never visit, to soils and trees and mushrooms fruiting in places you'll never see, all connected through air, through the patient dispersal of spores that know no boundaries. And fungi may influence something as vast as global weather itself. Those billions of spores floating in the atmosphere aren't just passive particles. They can act as seeds for water droplets, nuclei around which moisture condenses. In this way, fungal spores help clouds form, influencing when and where rain falls, participating in Earth's climate systems in ways we're only beginning to understand. Forests may not only recycle nutrients underground, but also call rain from the sky, sending spores aloft that coax moisture into clouds, creating feedback loops where life helps create the conditions life needs. The idea is still being researched, but it suggests that mushrooms may influence far more than soil and wood. They may reach into the very patterns of the atmosphere, into systems operating at continental and global scales. Imagine raindrops forming around spores released in a forest days ago, falling across fields and cities, each drop carrying a tiny piece of the fungal kingdom back to Earth. Fungi blur the boundaries between ground and sky, between local and global, reminding us that life doesn't stop at obvious borders, but flows everywhere, connecting systems we thought were separate, influencing processes we thought were purely physical, writing biology into the patterns of weather and climate themselves. In soils contaminated by human industry, where heavy metals poison the ground, fungi often arrive as silent healers. Certain mushrooms can absorb and concentrate heavy metals like lead, mercury, cadmium, pulling these toxins from the soil and sequestering them in their fruiting bodies. Their mycelial networks act like living sponges, extracting poisons from the environment, cleaning contaminated land without bulldozers or chemicals. This process, called mycoremediation, offers hope for restoring sites polluted by mining, manufacturing, improper waste disposal, places that might otherwise remain toxic for decades or centuries. Though the mushrooms themselves become unsafe to eat, filled with the metals they've absorbed, they've served their purpose, turning poisoned ground into cleaner soil where plants can eventually grow again. Imagine landscapes ruined by industrial accidents slowly coming back to life, not through expensive engineering, but through patient fungal work, threads spreading through soil, extracting toxins, concentrating them, removing them from the broader ecosystem. They're nature's alchemists, in a sense, transmuting danger into something contained, something manageable, showing us that even in our most damaged places, healing can begin not with machines, but with ancient wisdom of organisms that have been cleaning up messes for hundreds of millions of years. When oil spills into soil or water, the contamination can persist for decades, toxic hydrocarbons resisting breakdown, poisoning everything they touch. But certain fungi have evolved the ability to digest oil, breaking down petroleum molecules into harmless compounds through enzymes that can dismantle hydrocarbon chains. Mycelium secretes these enzymes into contaminated soil, essentially eating the oil, transforming black sludge into nutrients plants can use. In experiments, areas treated with appropriate fungi have shifted from oily wastelands to blooming fields within weeks or months, birds and insects returning as toxicity diminishes and life reclaims poisoned ground. This technique is part of mycoremediation, using mushrooms to heal landscapes damaged by human activity. Picture an oil-soaked shore slowly turning green again, not through human intervention alone, but through the work of fungi spreading their threads through poisoned earth, patient and persistent, doing what they've always done, breaking down complex molecules, recycling, transforming. Nature, it seems, has already evolved answers to many problems we create, tools and strategies waiting in organisms we've overlooked or underestimated. The challenge isn't developing new technologies from scratch, but learning to recognize and apply the solutions that already exist, grown from spores, fed by waste, turning our mistakes into opportunities for life to return.
Some rare fungi produce flavors and aromas that seem impossibly out of place in a forest. A few species create compounds that taste like chocolate or cocoa, rich and complex molecules that trigger the same sensory responses as actual chocolate, even though they come from completely different sources. Scientists believe these flavors arise from unique aromatic compounds, convergent chemistry that produces similar effects through different pathways. Though not as common as savory mushrooms, these chocolate-scented varieties remind us of fungi's incredible chemical diversity, their ability to create almost any flavor imaginable given enough evolutionary time and selective pressure. Imagine walking through damp woods expecting earthy smells and instead catching a whiff of something warm and sweet, like a bakery hidden among trees. For adventurous chefs, these mushrooms open strange new possibilities, desserts flavored with forest fungi rather than tropical cacao, sweet dishes that taste like chocolate but grow from decaying wood. It's another way mushrooms blur boundaries, offering surprises not just in shapes and colors, but in tastes that seem borrowed from entirely different realms, reminding us that flavor is just chemistry, molecules binding to receptors, and nature can produce those molecules through countless different routes, creating the same sensations from utterly different sources. In tropical forests, certain mushrooms cast light bright enough to illuminate surrounding leaves. These bioluminescent fungi glow with a greenish radiance, sometimes strong enough that you could read by their light if you gathered enough of them. The glow comes from the same basic chemistry as fireflies, luciferin reacting with oxygen in the presence of luciferase, but sustained continuously rather than flashing. Scientists think the light helps attract nocturnal insects, bringing pollinators to the mushroom when flying insects are most active, turning darkness into an advantage. To encounter them is to feel the forest has lit lanterns for you, glowing softly in undergrowth, marking paths through darkness. For centuries, people told stories about these lights, fairy fire and foxfire, mysterious glows emanating from rotting wood, seeming almost supernatural. Today, we understand the chemistry, but the wonder remains undiminished. They remind us that even in darkness, life finds ways to shine, creating beauty and light from decay, from processes we might think of as endings, but which fungi prove are also beginnings, transformations, opportunities for something new to emerge, glowing softly in the night. Hundreds of millions of years ago, Earth looked nothing like it does today. Long before forests spread across continents, before flowering plants evolved, massive fungi called prototaxites dominated the land, growing up to 30 feet tall, towering pillar-like structures that may have been the tallest organisms of their time. Fossils suggest these weren't trees or anything like modern plants, but rather enormous fungal fruiting bodies, standing solitary on landscapes otherwise empty of tall life, creating surreal alien vistas. Imagine traveling back to that world to see a horizon dotted with giant fungal spires rising from barren ground. No trees, no grass, just these strange towers and perhaps some low plants beginning to colonize the edges of water. They stood as giants when life on land was still experimental, still figuring out how to survive outside the oceans. Today, mushrooms are mostly small and ephemeral, but their ancestors were titans, the largest living things in their world, shaping landscapes through sheer size. It's humbling to realize that fungi once ruled as giants, that the humble mushrooms we see after rain are descendants of organisms that dominated a younger Earth, that everything changes given enough time, that today's giants were once small, and tomorrow's giants might currently be overlooked. Some fungi can survive complete desiccation, drying out until every drop of water is gone, until they seem lifeless and dead. Yet, when moisture returns, they awaken, resuming growth as if nothing happened, their cells protected by special compounds that prevent catastrophic damage during drought. This extraordinary ability allows them to colonize the harshest deserts, places where rain comes perhaps once a year, where most organisms can't survive. They wait, dormant and patient, sometimes for months or years, preserved by their own biochemistry until conditions improve. Scientists study these fungi for clues about how life might survive on Mars or other worlds where water is scarce, where organisms would need to endure long, dry periods between rare moments of moisture. Imagine a tiny fungal thread, brittle and seemingly dead, lying dormant for years, then springing back to life with a single rainfall, beginning to grow again as though no time had passed. In their quiet endurance, these organisms show us that survival sometimes means not fighting conditions, but accepting them, waiting them out, reducing metabolism to the barest minimum and persisting until the world changes, until opportunities return, showing that patience itself can be a survival strategy as effective as any adaptation. The resilience of fungi have made them subjects of space research. Scientists have sent mushrooms and spores aboard spacecraft, testing their survival in microgravity, in vacuum, in cosmic radiation far more intense than anything experienced on Earth's surface. Many not only survived, but continued growing, some even adapting, altering their chemistry in response to the extreme environment. Such studies hint that fungi could play vital roles in future space missions, perhaps recycling waste, producing food, breaking down materials, even providing radiation shielding for astronauts traveling to Mars or beyond. There's even speculation that hardy spores might survive interplanetary journeys, drifting through space on meteorites or dust, seeding new worlds with life from elsewhere. Whether or not panspermia is real, mushrooms in orbit remind us that life is astonishingly adaptable, that organisms we consider fragile can endure conditions that seem incompatible with biology. A mushroom that sprouts in a vacuum stretches our imagination about where life can go, suggesting Earth's hidden fungal kingdom may have potential that reaches beyond this planet, that the same organisms recycling leaves in your garden might one day help humans survive on other worlds. Beneath fields of wheat and corn, invisible partners are constantly at work. Mycorrhizal fungi live in symbiosis with crop roots, providing not just nutrients, but also immune support. By stimulating plant immune systems, fungi help crops resist diseases and pests, essentially training plants to defend themselves more effectively. In some cases, beneficial fungi outcompete harmful microbes directly, blocking them from root surfaces, preventing infection before it starts. Farmers are beginning to harness these ancient partnerships, using fungal inoculants instead of chemical pesticides, working with biology rather than against it. These partnerships remind us that agriculture doesn't have to be warfare against nature. It can be collaboration, working with organisms that have been supporting plant life for hundreds of millions of years. Just as forests thrive on fungal networks, farms of the future may find their greatest resilience not in chemicals, but in fungi, in relationships that predate human civilization and likely will continue long after we're gone. Partnerships written into the fundamental structure of how terrestrial life works. Beyond antibiotics, mushrooms are treasure houses of medical compounds. Substances derived from fungi are used to lower cholesterol, saving millions from heart disease. Immunosuppressants discovered in fungi make organ transplants possible, preventing rejection, allowing people to receive new hearts, kidneys, livers, and survive. Other compounds show promise fighting cancer, killing tumor cells while leaving healthy tissue relatively unharmed. Lovastatin, which revolutionized heart medicine, comes from fungi. Cyclosporin, crucial for transplant patients, was found in a soil fungus. Researchers continue scanning the fungal kingdom for the next breakthrough, knowing that each species might contain molecules useful for treating diseases we currently can't cure. For centuries, traditional medicine leaned on mushrooms, using them to treat everything from wounds to chronic illness. Modern science is revealing just how profound their pharmacological powers actually are, confirming what healers sensed through observation and experience. Each mushroom cap, each strand of mycelium may carry compounds that could save lives, cure diseases, ease suffering. To walk through woods is to wander through a living pharmacy where cures wait patiently to be discovered, hidden beneath moss and bark, growing from dead wood, existing for their own purposes, but carrying within them accidental gifts for humans wise enough to look. In 1928, Alexander Fleming noticed mold growing on a contaminated petri dish had killed surrounding bacteria. This chance observation led to penicillin, the first widely used antibiotic, which saved millions during World War II and transformed medicine forever.
Though penicillium is a mold rather than a mushroom, it belongs to the same great fungal kingdom, showing once again how deeply fungi shape human destiny. The discovery turned once deadly infections into treatable conditions, gave surgeons confidence to perform complex operations knowing infections could be controlled, enabled modern medicine as we know it. It's inspiring to think such a monumental change came not from deliberate human invention alone, but from noticing what a fungus was already doing, naturally, to defend itself against bacterial competition. That mold, growing accidentally on a forgotten dish, carried within it the power to rewrite medical history, to save countless lives, to change civilization's trajectory. It reminds us that fungi aren't just forest recyclers, they're also our unexpected partners in survival, producers of compounds we desperately need, allies in battles against diseases that once decimated populations. The story of penicillin is the story of paying attention, of recognizing that solutions might come from the most unlikely sources, from molds and mushrooms doing what they've always done, surviving. Every loaf of bread that rises, every glass of wine or beer that sparkles, owes its existence to fungi. Yeast, those single-celled cousins of mushrooms, consume sugars and release carbon dioxide and alcohol, processes humans learned to harness thousands of years ago. In bread, trapped gas makes dough light and airy. In beverages, alcohol and carbonation create drinks that have been central to human culture across continents and centuries. Without fungi performing fermentation, cuisine would be unrecognizable. No leavened bread, no wine, no beer, no vinegar, no soy sauce, no miso. Countless foods simply wouldn't exist. Archaeological evidence shows fermentation dates back to the earliest civilizations, possibly even earlier. Humans and fungi have been partners since we first settled into farming communities, maybe before. In a real sense, fungi shaped culture as much as nature, influencing rituals, economies, celebrations, daily life. When you break bread with someone or share a drink, you're participating in traditions that involve fungi, billions of cells working invisibly to transform simple ingredients into something greater. It's alchemy performed by microscopic organisms, ancient partnerships that have sustained and enriched human life for millennia, written so deeply into our food systems we barely notice anymore, but fundamental nonetheless. That yeast sprinkled into dough is alive, living cells multiplying in warm dough, feeding on sugars, releasing gases that create texture and flavor. These microscopic fungi were likely discovered by accident, wild yeast from air landing on ancient grains or fruit, beginning spontaneous fermentation that people noticed and learned to encourage. Over time, we domesticated yeasts, breeding strains for specific purposes, but they remain members of the fungal kingdom, related to mushrooms fruiting in forests. In every loaf, every bottle, there's a fungal story. Billions of cells cooperating, transforming sweetness into substance, showing us that life's tiniest members can produce effects far larger than their size suggests. Some mushrooms look wounded, beating bright red liquid on their caps like drops of blood. Hydnellum peckii, the bleeding tooth fungus, produces this crimson exudate that seems disturbingly biological, as if the mushroom is injured and bleeding. The red fluid isn't blood, but a sap-like substance containing pigments and chemical compounds, its purpose still debated by scientists, possibly moisture regulation or chemical defense against predators. To encounter one feels uncanny, nature creating something that triggers human pattern recognition, that seems like blood but isn't, that plays on our instincts and expectations. These mushrooms remind us the forest operates by its own rules, creating forms and substances not meant for us to understand, strategies evolved for purposes that have nothing to do with human observers. We're witnesses to a world where mushrooms can appear to bleed, where chemistry creates illusions, where nothing is quite what it seems at first glance, where the familiar and strange interweave constantly, challenging us to look closer, to question assumptions, to appreciate strangeness on its own terms, rather than trying to force it into human categories. On the opposite end, some mushrooms smell like death, like rotting flesh, so powerfully that humans recoil. Stinkhorns emit odors that mimic decay, attracting flies and beetles that normally feed on dead animals. The insects land, thinking they've found food, and leave covered in spores, unwittingly dispersing the fungus. It's manipulation through disgust, evolution turning a repulsive smell into a reproductive strategy. To us, the stench is awful, something to avoid. To the mushroom, it's success, bringing exactly the partners needed despite or because of its offensiveness. In folklore, these mushrooms were linked to bad omens, their appearance and smell seeming supernatural. But they're just clever survivors using chemistry to influence behavior, turning insect feeding habits into spore dispersal mechanisms. In a quiet forest, a sudden whiff of decay might signal not death but life, a mushroom reproducing, playing on senses, using what we find repulsive as a tool. The forest speaks many languages, some beautiful and some disgusting to human senses, but all effective, all refined over evolutionary time, all proof that success comes in countless forms, not all of them pleasant. And so we drift toward the end of our journey through the hidden kingdom of mushrooms. From glowing fungi lighting dark forests to spores floating invisible above cities, from networks older than forests to organisms that might one day help humans colonize other worlds, we've wandered through a realm that is simultaneously hidden and essential, fragile and indestructible, ancient and constantly renewing. Mushrooms remind us that life is not always loud or visible, that much of Earth's most important work happens in silence, beneath our feet, in threads so fine they slip through spaces we can't see without instruments. Fungi teach patience. They show us what resilience looks like over deep time. They demonstrate transformation, how death becomes life, how endings are also beginnings, how everything flows through cycles that stretch back hundreds of millions of years. They recycle matter, partner with plants, support ecosystems, produce compounds that heal, create materials that could replace polluting plastics, offer solutions to problems we've only recently recognized. Without them, there would be no forests rising toward the sky, no bread in ovens, no wine in glasses, no antibiotics fighting infection, no balance in carbon cycles. The stage would be empty, the play of life unable to begin. As you let these thoughts settle, imagine the slow pulse of mycelium beneath you if you're near soil or grass, a hidden heartbeat steady and calm, older than you can easily comprehend. Imagine spores drifting like invisible snow, carrying possibility into every corner of air. Imagine mushrooms glowing faintly in darkness somewhere far away, quiet beacons reminding us that even in shadow, life continues, persists, shines. This is what science offers when told slowly and gently, an understanding that the world is stranger, richer, more interconnected than we usually notice, that by pausing, by paying attention, by looking carefully, we glimpse the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary, the profound within the small. If you've found peace in this journey, if these slow explorations bring you comfort, perhaps you'll return for another,
There are many more hidden wonders waiting to be shared, from deep oceans to distant stars, from microscopic worlds to cosmic scales. But for now, there's nothing more you need to do. You can let the story of mushrooms fade like the last light of evening, leaving only stillness behind. If sleep comes, let it carry you gently. If you remain awake, you're welcome to stay, to drift back through these ideas, or to simply rest in quiet awareness that the world is full of hidden marvels, full of partnerships and mysteries, full of organisms working patiently to maintain the cycles that make all life possible. Rest well, breathe slowly, and remember that mushrooms are always there, mostly unseen but constantly present, recycling, connecting, supporting, transforming, working in silence to keep Earth alive and balanced. Sometimes they rise overnight like miracles after rain. Sometimes they've been waiting for centuries beneath the surface, patient beyond measure, ready to fruit when conditions align. The world is full of hidden kingdoms, and tonight you visited one, walking softly through forests of thought and information, learning about organisms that shaped this planet and continue shaping it, that might one day help us survive on others, that connect everything in ways we're still learning to see. Good night, sleep peacefully, and may your dreams be filled with gentle forests, glowing lights, and the quiet wisdom of fungi that have been here far longer than we have, that will likely remain long after we're gone. Patient guardians of Earth's cycles, silent partners in the endless dance of life and death and life again.